Alright, part 2. So you remember how at the beginning of the syncretism video I said,
You know what's crazy? The fact that an Irish Celtic pagan goddess, meant to represent the family and magic, was taken and transformed into a Catholic saint, and even later on was adopted by slaves to become Queen of the Dead.
well, now we get to talk about that lovely goddess. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Bridget, Celtic goddess of the hearth. Now, Bridget was kind of a multi-purpose goddess. Her main focus was the hearth, and was even symbolized by fire, but she was in charge of a lot of other things too. She was also the goddess of poetry, magicians, healers, bards, and even sometimes had connections to the sun. Oh, and as mentioned previously, she was connected to fire as well. You know, Bridget reminds me of another goddess, but I can't seem to put my finger on it. Bridget was a Celtic goddess of the hearth, but she had other attributes like magic, poetry, and more. Because she had so many different things to rule over, something interesting happened. Sometimes Bridget would be treated as 3 distinct goddesses rather than one. One aspect of her was the fires of inspiration, which dealt with poetry. Another aspect was the fires of the forge, which was venerated by blacksmiths. And her main aspect was the fire of the hearth. This is similar to Christian Trinitarianism, where one deity is treated as a 3-in-1 sort of deal. I'm not going to discuss Trinitarianism any further, because this video is not about Trinitarianism. Feel free to argue in the comments though, as I watch from a safe distance. Bridget was the daughter of the earth god Dagda, and the fertility goddess Boan, or the Morrigan, some sources vary. She was also born at sunrise, and it's said that when she was born, rays of light emanated from her head. She also drank some milk from the cow of the spirit world, which imbued her with even more magical power. And just so she could look the part, she had a cool magic cloak as well. She was the wife of a druid king, and she bore him 3 sons. One of her sons died in battle, which caused her to go from a sometimes war goddess to a more peace-orientated goddess. Because of her more peaceful leanings, she became the favored hearth goddess for many Celtic tribes, both across the British Isles and on the mainland as well, but she was mostly concentrated in Ireland. Now, because the Irish were an illiterate culture and the people who brought writing to Ireland were Christians, we don't have many tales from Irish mythology, because a lot of them were rewritten by monks and missionaries who turned the gods into ancient war chiefs or demons. As a result, we don't have many stories regarding the old Irish gods like we do for the Greeks and the Norse. Thankfully though, something interesting happened with Bridget. Now, because of how widespread Bridget's worship was, when the Catholics came to Ireland, they couldn't just label her as a demon like they did with the other gods. Otherwise, the Irish wouldn't convert. So instead of demonizing her, they stripped her divinity away. This is where Bridget, goddess of the hearth, became Saint Bridget. Well, I guess you could say she saint a goddess anymore. Yeah, I deserve this. First of all, I gotta say this. Saint Bridget probably didn't exist. There are churches who claim to have artifacts from her, but we have no idea if those really are her because she doesn't appear in any historical record until after Ireland's conversion. Regardless, I'm going to treat her as if she were real, just to make the story flow smoother. Upon hearing her story though, you'll probably see why most scholars consider her a repurposed Celtic god rather than someone who actually existed. Saint Bridget was born to a druid king and a Christian slave woman. Because her mother was a slave, Bridget was automatically a slave from birth. As a baby, she was unable to drink milk produced by druids, so she was given milk produced by cows. Sounds familiar. As a child, she donated whatever extra she had to the poor, and supposedly could materialize food out of thin air by praying. Eventually, her father got annoyed with her acts of charity, and he tried to marry her off. And can I just point out how awful that is? First of all, that's your daughter, dude. And secondly, she can literally make food materialize out of thin air. Why are you trying to get rid of that? Eventually, her father tried selling her to the King of Leinster. As the negotiations took place, Bridget swiped her father's jeweled sword and gave it to a beggar so he could barter it for food. The King of Leinster saw this and urged Bridget's father to free her because of how holy she was. Steal from the rich, give to the needy, the ends justify the means, I guess. Her father freed her, and after gaining her freedom, she took a vow of chastity, and she was even ordained by St. Patrick. Yes, the St. Patrick. He accidentally ordained her as a priest though, and when some protested a woman becoming a priest, St. Patrick said, "She's destined by God for bigger things, I guess." Dang, Patrick, that's really progressive for the times. Bridget then wanted to establish an abbey, so she went to the local king. The king was pagan and said that she could have as much land as she could cover with her cloak. Bridget then went outside and laid her cloak on the ground, and it grew large enough to cover an area suitable for an abbey. Magic cloak. Sounds familiar. She built a women's abbey where the women could practice Christianity. After that, her life mainly centered around the abbey, and she died February 1st, 525, at least if you assume she's real. February 1st was also the festival day for the Celtic goddess Bridget. So that's the story of Saint Bridget, and you can probably see why people think she's a repurposed Celtic goddess rather than an actual person. Interestingly, this is where most people tend to stop when they're talking about Celtic Bridget and Saint Bridget. But there's a whole other third to this story that no one really talks about. And I have no idea why, because it's probably the most fascinating part of the story. Our story picks up over 1,000 years later, from the Emerald Isle all the way to the Caribbean. Bridget became a Catholic saint and stayed that way for a really long time. So long that we're going to have to fast forward to the 16 and 1700s. You know what was going on in that period? The transatlantic slave trade. Now everyone can agree, the transatlantic slave trade was awful. It was the worst forced movement of people in history, and completely changed the demographics of our world forever. However, one interesting thing that happened was the cultural merging that occurred in the Atlantic world. The transatlantic slave trade created a melting pot where European, African, and Native American cultural influences all mixed in together to create entirely new cultures. The Spanish and the French colonized a lot of the Caribbean, and they brought Catholicism with them, and they forced their slaves to convert. The English were there too, and while they weren't Catholic, they did bring Irish servants who were. As I mentioned in the last video, African slaves weren't keen on giving up their heritage and way of life, or religion. And no matter how difficult it was to keep those practices alive, they stayed alive. What often ended up happening was during the day they would do Christian things like go to mass, pray, etc. But during the night they would practice their traditional African religions. And over a few generations, these cultures started to mix and become one, and a new religion was born, Voodoo. I'm not going to get into Voodoo as a whole, I only want to talk about Bridget's role in Voodoo. She was called Mama Bridget, and she is the wife of Baron Samedi, who, if you don't know, is god of the dead. Bridget is also the only white god in Voodoo, and she kept her Irish look of pale skin and ginger hair. Unlike her Celtic and Saint counterparts though, who are quiet and reserved, Mama Bridget is loud, explicit, and just like her husband, she's a party animal. She, along with her husband, are the ones who guide souls to the afterlife. Though it wouldn't surprise me that she goes to guide them if her husband had too much to drink. Hey, that's just Baron Samedi for you. The dude is a mad lad. Bridget was also deemed as the protector of women. When a woman is buried in a new cemetery, they dedicate the grave to Mama Bridget so she would guide their soul to the afterlife. If she catches someone disrespecting the dead, there will be hell to pay. She also plays a hand in love as well. Women would often call upon Mama Bridget to prevent their partners from cheating. If a man did cheat on his girlfriend, or wife, then Mama Bridget would be called down to punish the cheater. Well, here we are, 1,500 years later, and she is still being worshipped. She started as a multi-purpose goddess from the ancient British Isles, and then she was transformed into a folk hero by the Catholics, only to then be later adopted by slaves in the Caribbean and become Queen of the Dead. Syncretism is crazy, isn't it? This goddess from Ireland was thrown around by various people before coming into her modern form. And you know what makes this even crazier? Thanks to neo-paganism, she's being worshipped as a Celtic goddess again! Think about it. There are 3 different groups of people, all worshipping essentially the same figure, just for different reasons. Huh. Wow. It's kind of fitting, actually. She was originally treated as 3 goddesses in one, and now she's being worshipped by 3 different groups. Now that's some crazy foreshadowing. I hope you guys enjoyed this 2-parter. This originally was going to be 1 video, but syncretism took so long that I split it into 2. I'm so glad to finally publish this. I've been wanting to make it for a while. I hope you guys enjoyed it.
Hey there, Mythology Guy in Post here. Sorry this is so late. I meant for it to come out before St. Patty's Day, but the virus who shall not be named caused my whole school to shut down and go online. So I've had to move myself back home. It's been a very stressful time for me, but as well as everyone else out there. I hope you're all staying healthy. I'm so glad to finally get this out. Thank you so much for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you want to see more, and have a good one.